Chapter 7. Henry Purcell. In the midst of history and the historical perspective, if one looks hard enough, one will always find an anomaly. Henry Purcell, the most profound of all English composers, musician of the Restoration period, optimist of London, with its new society prototypical of the continentalism and wealth we find in London today, found a quiet space to look back. Of course, like Mendelssohn after him, this looking back displayed more of a magical past than that of a real one. Mendelssohn's encounter with Scotland is indeed magical. What did Purcell do? Amongst all the pompous petitions requested by Charles II, James II, and Queen Mary, he found time to open up an old dusty chest of viols. The viola da gamba was on the decline shortly after the huge success of the violin. But Purcell had unfinished business with this slow and sturdy creature, with strings made of gut that whispered something Tudor about it, and a craftsmanship that found its origin in Belgium, yet its technique in the Jews of northern Italy. Even the notion of consort, ensemble, began to acquire connotations anathema to the intellectual characteristic that classical music took on around Purcell's time. The consort made music a group activity for courts and households, which then became a domestic activity. Children learnt simple songs on it at home, sometimes with the hope of putting on plays at functions. The consort was entertainment. However, it was the consort of the viola that really cemented this attitude. Even the idea that choristers learnt how to read music with a viola put certain virtuosos off. Nevertheless, Purcell persisted with both the consort and the viola. One imagines Purcell looking out from his window on Bowling Alley, East Street, catching the spires of Westminster Abbey through the curtains. What is he thinking? Can he hear young William Byrd's voice resound still, a chorister of Westminster Abbey all those years back? Is he overcome by a desire to continue the lineage of viola consort music? Chipped Gothic features, rain-worn walls, leaves blown on the breath of God. Whatever that constant unknowing was that gave rise to his pensiveness, it came out in his fantasias. Of course, Byrd had his fantasias, but Purcell turned the continuous harmony of notes into cyclical, contrapuntal Baroque folds, the thousand folds of musical garments drooping, crossing, mirroring. And these very same folds also became the folds of the psyche, the folding of the private experience of sound with that of the public experience, and also that of the introspective musician with that of the gregarious musician. Purcell's composition is the fantasia of the mind, with all its contradictions and taboos. It is even the fancy of the young Purcell allured by alcohol and women amongst the squalor of London and its charred backdrop. Yes, Purcell could drink with the best of them, raising and clunking tankards next to the open fireplaces, dark wooden beams, and low ceilings of the many labyrinthine pubs of a post-1666 London, immersed in spittled joyous song. Come, come, let us drink. 'Tis in vain to think like fools on grief or sadness. Let our money fly and our sorrows die, all worldly care is madness. But wine and good cheer will, in spite of our fear, inspire our hearts with mirth, boys. The time we live, to wine let us give, since all must turn to earth, boys. Hand about the bowl, ye delight of my soul, and to my hand commend it. A fig for chink 'twas made to buy drink, and before we go hence, we'll spend it. It was this distillation, the sweetness of English eccentricity, wit, and lightness, with a difficult Gothic backdrop full of darkness and sorrow, that would later be defined as the misunderstood British tradition. That particular drinking song by Purcell, Come Let Us Drink, composed of many canons expressing the persistent repetitions of rebuilding and restoring London's city streets, the insistent lengthy litanies of royal inaugurations, yet also the vulnerable repetitions of the blackbird, starling, nightingale, and crow in its natural habitat, endlessly calling out, only half aware of the imminent natural catastrophe advancing. Flood, plague, fire, war. Purcell's fantasias foresaw the emerging twists and turns of a new world similar to how Carl Jung, 300 years later, on a transatlantic liner to America with a certain Sigmund Freud, foresaw the darkness of the Great War. Jung overlooked the vast ocean with a thought that would haunt him to his death. In October 1913, while I was on a journey, I was suddenly seized by an overpowering vision. I saw a monstrous flood covering all the northern and low-lying areas between the North Sea and the Alps. When it came up to Switzerland, I saw that the mountains grew higher and higher to protect our country. I realized that a frightful catastrophe was in progress. I saw the mighty yellow waves, the floating rubble of civilization, and the drowned bodies of uncounted thousands. Then the whole sea turned to blood. This vision lasted about 1 hour. I was perplexed and nauseated and ashamed of my weakness. In the mid-17th century, whilst Purcell's darker side was preoccupied by the incandescence of mystery found in English forests, the famous philosopher John Locke suggested that the forest was off bounds. A human can only perceive qualities of the tree such as color, shape, and size. The tree beyond perception would have to be left to the skeptics and mystics. I wonder if Locke's discovery was simultaneously Purcell's nagging mystical obsession. If we can't get to the tree, then maybe the music can. Henry Purcell continued to think about nature and William Byrd and Thomas Tallis and all those old heroes of the English tradition and all the shadows of ruin that resisted being known in an increasingly knowledgeable epoch. One evening, after a few too many ales at his local tavern, Purcell walked back home through his cherished city of London, across the Thames and through Westminster. He smiled at all the mystery of the world in that drunken, half-jovial state we all know so well in this era. He finally appeared at his door on Bowling Alley, East Street, and gave it a knock. What then happened, which is now famously documented, is that his wife refused to let him in on account of his current state of intoxication. He was left, then, to walk the streets of London in the cold and rain. He subsequently caught a chill, which led to his death at the age of 35. I reached the wooded area just off Tosland Road, where Ben spent most of his mornings, afternoons, and evenings either with James or in total solitude. I had somehow managed to get out of my car and was already deep within the woodland. Acorns crunched beneath my trainers, and a thick blanket of sound, the white noise of nature, descended on me like a bedsheet that dressed me as if I were a ghost at a Halloween party. I could feel my untied shoelaces dragging across the dry leaves, but I did nothing about it. I walked between the trees for hours, perhaps circling myself many times. There was no Isabel, no Mum or Dad, no thoughts that were not applied to the present, to sight, sound, touch. I had only felt this sense of the present once before, when I had attempted to walk from London to Lincoln on a beautiful summer's evening in order to attend my sister's wedding. I could not afford a train ticket, so I tried to walk. I got as far as St. Albans, where the motorway made it impossible for me to walk beside it. I climbed into a large nest of bramble, where I was scratched many times, foraging through natural tunnels, not knowing where I would end up. That was the first time that I encountered nature as a cruel thing, an obstacle. Yet here I was, free to walk the open forest, picking up glimmers of stars and passing car headlights in the distance. All the evening calls of birds and owls turned into curious murmurs made by Benji. I was listening hard to them, but I could not find him. Sometimes his voice became playful, even sarcastic, and at other times deadly serious and somber. "I can't see you, Benji," I would shout out every few seconds. Is there no possibility that Benji could be incarnated as these sounds? As a tawny owl, a nightjar, deep in the trunk of an old big-belly oak? Is there a way that by me simply thinking about him, his spirit manifests and joins the world of animated life? I felt as though I had walked for days on end, yet the time, evening, had stayed the same, and the same voices of animals and insects were talking to me, repeating something that I could not understand. Finally, a harsh light targeted a tree in the distance. I walked slowly up to it and tried not to breathe. I arrived at the foot of its stump and became drenched in the very same harsh light. I turned to the light and found that it had come from the headlights of an old Renault Alliance. It was Benji's car, with the driver's seat door swung ajar just as he used to have it. The motor was running. Just as I was about to run to the car, I turned to the tree stump and saw Benjamin Flew. He was half buried and half rotten, but I knew that it was him. His face looked like the face of the moon, cold, stony, and withered, yet full of mystery. Who had done this to him? Was it James or Brian? Did he come here to die quietly after sending that message? Every background sound suddenly came to the fore and reverberated from the many conclaves of Benjamin's swollen face. Louder and louder the sounds grew until they deafened me, and I appeared like Edvard Munch's scream of nature with both hands clasped to my own skull, now withering away and disappearing into the night sky and farther between the spaces of burning stars. I awoke to the last passage of Purcell's Fantasias. It took me a second to realize where I was and why I was there. I must have dozed off somehow after reaching Toslin Wood. I took a sip of coffee from a 2-day-old cardboard cup and lit a cigarette. I took a good look at my surroundings from inside my car. Well, it doesn't look that interesting to me, I said to myself, and there's no snow this time, James. I got out of the car, leaving the door open to let out all the smoke. It was getting cold, so I left my motor running and walked out into the wood. I had absolutely nothing to go on. I wished there and then that I had a metal detector, and that maybe I could go out searching for misplaced coins and lighters that Benji once had and lost. I walked round the wood 1,000 times, just walking, not really thinking. I knew that this was the denouement, the moment where everything was meant to come together. But like many things in life, nothing had transpired. No hidden meaning was revealed, and no resolution had made itself known to me. I returned back to the car and lit another cigarette. Why hadn't Isabel messaged me more? Usually she would say that she missed me. She would ask for me to come home, or ask, "Where have you been?" Is she in love with someone else? Is that it? Sam the eccentric has gone off to his studies, and now she was left to relive those halcyon days where she was free to do her makeup perfectly for 3 hours and receive the attention that she had only procured when we had first started dating? I pick up the phone and give her a ring. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3 rings. 4 rings. It goes to her voicemail. I decide to say something. Isabel, I'm sure you're missing me lots and can't bear to be without me. I watched a great performance today. Mr. Rose performed some pieces of Purcell and Boccherini. We were out in this beautiful open space in Cambridgeshire, and we are now retiring to the nearest pub to talk music and the fate of the century. Something hit me abruptly as I was leaving this message for Isabel. Who am I, and why am I saying these words? It suddenly came to my attention that every being that has ever lived on the face of this planet has always had some inclination or other, some form of personality. Why do I speak this way, in this tone? Why the defensive, sarcastic attitude? Why the lies? Why the need to uphold my status in conjunction with music and the intellectual? We are all born with a mind and a body which quickly learns the flaws and foibles of subjectivity, with desires and prejudices, with parts that are conditioned and parts that break away from the mold. Not only is there history in that tree over there, but in Benjamin Flew, there is also a history of the self, of consciousness, of emotion. Does culture make us this way, so self-invested? It would be so easy, alternatively, to simply say that I exist and that I will die, and that this acknowledgement of death propels me to search for signs of life that prosper, to feel pain at signs that do not, to try and love, because love is surely a wonderful thing, better than sports cars or mansions, better than television programs and new clothes, better than money and restaurants. I realize that I have said nothing for several seconds on the phone. Minor notes sustain. The world tries to stay the same, but is disregarded and overturned by change. Someone is being sick from too much alcohol. Someone is angry and wants to fight someone. Someone makes love to another, but is really making love to themselves. Someone has lost a daddy. Someone is about to die in their sleep. Rain starts to fall. I love you, Isabel. I hang up and find that I have a message from a Terry organ.